host of tasks remain to be tackled post-general election here in South Korea, including efforts to bridge the partisan divide and to advance domestic and foreign policy agendas. So what is the fate of the nation's healthcare reform? Does the Yoon administration's North Korea policy look to change? And what are the prospects of a trilateral summit among Seoul, Tokyo and Beijing in capital Seoul in late May? Hello and welcome. It's Monday here in Korea and you're watching Issues and Insiders. We start the work week with our foreign correspondents touching upon some of the latest developments here in this part of the world. For this, I have Chloe Borgnon with me. Chloe, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Jacco Zwetsloot with us. Jacco, it's good to have you here.
The pleasure's all mine.
Right, Chloe, much of the international headlines regarding South Korea in recent times has been focused on the result of its latest parliamentary election. That being said, what efforts do you believe are needed, perhaps, to bridge the gap over the country's partisan divide?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that there is a real will from the people to bridge that gap. I saw that in most of Korean media, for example, in the Korea Arirang, they were having interviews with voters right after the election. And they were saying that what they needed most was more harmony between the parties. And it's true that this election has been quite strong-worded and kind of violent in words. So for France 24, I did a video piece on violence in politics right before the official launch of the campaign. I was mostly focusing on the January attacks against Lee Jae-myung from the Democratic Party and Bae Yoo-jin from the People Power Party. And what I saw with some experts, they were saying that what really happened is that there is this bridge, like this kind of partisan polarization where both sides are going stronger apart from each other. And this is also happening because of incitement to hatred online, especially on YouTube channel, etc. And this expert was saying that because this polarization is stronger and stronger, both sides are seeing each other as less human every time, and violence is getting stronger and the division is keep on growing. So I think that there is this point of campaign should focus less on the personality of the leaders and of the politicians and more on the ideas and more on the programs that they have to kind of bridge this divide and bring harmony as people would like to see.
Right, of course, policies for the people then. Jacco, I understand this next question might be a bit tough, but do you expect perhaps a retreat in efforts to reform the country's healthcare sector following the result of this latest parliamentary election?
Yeah, that's certainly a question on a lot of people's minds. Right now, the People Power Party and its allies hold a little over a third of all the seats in the National Assembly, at 108 seats altogether, which puts President Yoon in a weak and a difficult position. But as my colleague John Lee at Korea Pro reminded me, it's not in such a weak position that the opposition parties can override his veto. So for that they would need 200 seats or more in the National Assembly, and so they'd have to convince 8 at least members of the People Power Party to vote their way. What does that mean for the medical school quotas, which Yoon said that he was definitely going to push through and which was non-negotiable? Well, it's interesting because this is one of Yoon's policies that actually has attracted a lot of support from people across the country, especially in rural areas where they may not have a lot of doctors, and so people would like to see more doctors with the ageing population. So the Democratic Party may try to bring about a resolution to the conflict, but it's hard to see some compromise that the Democratic Party could put forward that would be acceptable both to President Yoon on the one hand and to the doctors on the other, since both sides are quite strong in not budging at the moment. And they can't override that veto, as I mentioned, with a competing law. So it looks like this problem will take a while to solve. Now, last Friday, President Yoon said that, or his office said, that he would be giving a statement after the National Assembly elections to address what he will do after his party's clear defeat in the parliamentary elections. Now, it looks like that's going to come out tomorrow, so we're exactly a day too early to give a clear answer. But tomorrow we may have a better idea. But I think a lot of people are waiting to see what he will say, and this problem is going to be with us for a while yet.
Right, indeed. And before we delve further into the impact of the outcome of the election on President Yoon Suk-yeol's policies, Chloe, generally speaking, why does it appear as though incumbent leaders, especially in democratic countries, are fighting very low approval ratings?
Yeah, they're fighting low approval ratings, but also very high disapproval ratings. So that means that people are not only not not okay with it, they are also disagreeing quite strongly. So few countries are really strongly impacted by this. So South Korea, Japan, but also in Europe, France, and Germany in the United Kingdom, with approval rates that are below 30%, which is quite bad. So those numbers come from Morning Consult agency, and they were done on beginning of March 2024, which means that we don't have the effects on the election like right now in South Korea. We will see if it changed something and if there are effects on Yoon Suk-yeol approval rates or not. But so the reason why, there are specific reasons for each country. So if we think about South Korea, we know that the strikes and of the doctors and the way it was handled by the government has been one of the reason that made the approval rate move. So first of all, it went up, then again went a bit down for Yoon Suk-yeol. But in France, for example, it's the same. We had some recent reform for the retirement, for example, social reform that strongly impacted Emmanuel Macron's rates of approval. But there are also common ground for all those countries with economic situation, that's a lot of inflation, the inequalities are getting stronger and stronger, and overall there's a feeling of boredom from the electors, of the voters, for the different politicians. So in Europe, for example, that does translate into the rise of the far-right parties, like we have seen in Italy with Giorgia Meloni recently.
Right. Meanwhile, Jacco, to what extent does the Yoon administration's perhaps North Korea policy look to be affected by the latest parliamentary election outcome?
To be sure, we really have to wait until his post-election statement tomorrow, but since we're here today, let me go out on a limb and speculate a little bit. I see little probability at this stage that the Democratic Party will make inter-Korean politics or the stance towards North Korea a main priority. Firstly, North Korea-related issues were not really a big issue that voters chose to how to elect in the election campaign, and very few voters anyway in any election choose their candidate based on the strategy or the policy towards North Korea. And secondly, although the Democratic Party usually pushes a pro-engagement policy with the North, since the last year of former President Moon's administration, North Korea has made it very clear that it has no interest in engaging with South Korea right now, no matter who is in charge of the presidential office. So that was reinforced, of course, in December last year when Kim Jong-un gave a speech to his version of the parliament in which he said that he was finished with the idea of peaceful unification with South Korea. This was very much seen as a slap in the face to people on the progressive side of politics in South Korea, the Democratic Party particularly. So I just don't think we'll see the Democratic Party claiming a mandate to fight President Yoon on this issue. Of course, the DP may criticize Yoon's policies or cabinet choices, as it did when Yoon picked his current unification minister last year, Kim Yong-ho, who's seen as a hardliner, and also when he opted to increase defence spending. But beyond that, there's very little that they could do. And an interesting parallel is in Taiwan. So unlike in Taiwan, where the former President Ma Ying-jeou recently visited Beijing as a private citizen and met with China's President Xi Jinping in the Great Hall of the People, even though Ma does not hold a government position at this time, this is not possible in South Korea. Nobody from South Korea can visit Pyongyang without the explicit permission of the current South Korean government through the Ministry of Unification and the National Intelligence Service. So the Democratic Party cannot send a representative north to meet with Kim Jong-un and talk about engagement behind President Yoon's back. So in short, I see no major change here.
Right. And staying with North Korea-related matters, Chloe, Pyongyang and Beijing held their highest-level talks in almost 5 years, this last week, that is. Do tell us a bit about this meeting and its broader implications.
Yeah, sure. So Sao Lechi, the chairman of China's National People's Congress, was in North Korea from last Thursday and until this weekend. He met with his DPRK counterpart, Cho Yong-hae, but also on Saturday he met with Kim Jong-un himself. And as you said, it's the highest level meeting of the sort between China and North Korea in 5 years, so since COVID-19 pandemics and the lockdown of North Korea. It's also interesting to note that this year is the 75th anniversary of the diplomatic ties ties between the two countries. And it was reminded by Kim Jong-un himself when he said that he was calling 2024 the year of the PRK and China friendship. So what we know about what happened in those meetings is really scarce because it was only given by the KCNA agency. And as they say that they discussed to improve cooperation in political, economical, and cultural fields. And it was also said that they had discussion on regional and international issues of mutual concerns. So obviously this part was not explained by the agency, but we can imagine that this is the part that will have broader implication, especially in the peninsula. We can see a few implications there. So obviously in geopolitical, in the regional field and international field, because China will show itself as a strong ally to North Korea. It was already seen in a few weeks ago, with the abstention of China on the vote to renew the panel of experts in the the UN. And also there's strong diplomatic implication for North Korea. They have been getting way closer to Russia recently. So the fact that China is still showing up as a strong ally is a strong point for them also as socialist nations, since we talked about it a few months ago also, but since Cuba is making diplomatic ties with South Korea, the North has to show that they still have strong allies, and that's also a strong point for them to be having China coming to see them.
Right. Against this backdrop, also last week, but here in the southern part of the peninsula, Jacco, naval authorities from South Korea, Japan and the US engaged in 2 days, I believe, of maritime training. Do you suppose these shows of strength serve to keep North Korea perhaps in check?
Well, we haven't seen a lot of dangerous maritime activity by North Korea lately. In fact, I cannot remember the last time when there was a naval clash between the two Koreas or between North Korea and Japanese boats. So we have to ask ourselves where the most clear and present danger could come from. Now, let me read you a sentence from the US Congressional Search Service report that was released in February of this year. The US Department of Defense states that China's Navy is the largest navy in the world with a battle force of over 370 platforms, including major surface combatants, submarines, ocean-going amphibious ships, mine warfare ships, aircraft carriers, and fleet auxiliaries. It's a long sentence. And at the same time, we have seen some small-level clashes between China and the Philippines and dangerous approaches by the Chinese Coast Guard ships towards Japanese-held islands near Taiwan. So I believe that these trilateral exercises and trainings are more about showing strength to Beijing than Pyongyang to head off any attempts at adventurism. A show of force to China is also, at the same time, a show of force to North Korea. So it's a little bit like hitting two birds with one stone. Hopefully both countries will be persuaded not to engage in any dangerous acts. Don't forget, though, that the US, South Korea and Japan, they're standing up for internationally recognized open seas and maritime borders. They're not advocating anything strange or unusual here. They're just trying to hold the line in terms of this is the normal way things go.
Right, and also talking about trilateral interactions, Chloe, there are prospects of trilateral talks here in Seoul to take place among leaders of South Korea, Japan and China, most likely in late May. What issues, Chloe, do you believe should top, that is, these trilateral talks if they do take place?
Yeah, so as you say, if they do take place, because for now we just know that they are hoping to be able to do them in late May. It's a will that's been going on since November 2023, when the foreign affairs ministers of the three countries met in Busan, and they said at that time that it was vital to have those trilateral talks. It was vital to the restoration and normalization of the tripartite cooperation. So it's important to note that those trilateral talks at the origin were meant to upgrade the relationship between the three neighbors countries and also to develop international economic system in Asia. So it's possible to expect that Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and Chinese Premier Li Qiang will be talking about economical affairs, especially we can imagine that it would be about semiconductors, for example, which is a market that strongly ties the three countries together on the economic side. And obviously, we can also think that North Korean situation will be talked about, and especially on its nuclear and missiles program that can be a threat for the peninsula and the region.
Right, and staying with the same issue, Jacco, do you believe the envisioned trilateral talks will perhaps lead to some form of tangible advance with regard to ensuring regional security or addressing regional security concerns?
Yeah, it's a great question. And let me start by introducing a little bit of context here. So the last trilateral summit of this kind that brought together the leaders of China, Japan and South Korea was in December 2019. So a whole pandemic ago, 4.5 years have passed to be exact. So except for Xi Jinping, the other two leaders of the other two nations have changed. So we've got 2 out of 3 are at the first time meeting. Now, I don't expect that these new trilateral talks will lead to any significant resolution in regional security concerns. We have to remember that right now China is still showing that it has a very assertive forward stance on advancing the claims that it has over territories in both the South China Sea and the East China Sea. So, for example, right now about once or twice a day, Japanese fighters are sent into the air to follow, monitor or warn Chinese Air Force bombers, pilots, fighters and drones that fly in or near or approach Japan's Air Defense Identification Zone. Now, the Air Defense Identification Zone is that area of airspace where any unknown aircraft coming in must be identified. Now, how long has this been going on? Actually, since before the previous summit in December 2019. So it's actually been going on for quite a while. Sometimes it happens more frequently, sometimes less so. And some analysts like to call this China's use of grey zone air power, because it's kind of in a grey space. It's not really war, it's not really peace. It is aggressive, it is assertive, so it's in a grey zone. So I don't think this will be resolved at the summit. I think if there's one thing that seems clear, it is that China prefers not to discuss things like territorial disputes and sovereignty issues in a multinational, multilateral framework. It prefers to do that very much in bilateral situations where it's only talking to the other party with whom it has a disagreement. So I doubt that very much will be achieved in this area at the Trilateral Summit. However, I would like to agree with Chloe that probably they will talk about North Korea and try to find some ways to coordinate their approaches to address North Korea's missile testing or the potential risk of nuclear proliferation through dialogue and cooperation, because that is one issue that the three nations can probably agree on without threatening China's immediate interests.
Right. Moving forward, Chloe, the Group of 7 summit is poised to take place in Italy in June. Now, Seoul, South Korea, has been putting in quite a bit of efforts to formally join this particular multilateral framework. What are the prospects of South Korea becoming a formal member of the Group of 7, do you think?
Yeah, well, it will be an objective that would be in line with the President Yoon Suk-yeol political lines, because he has been trying to get closer to the United States and to the Western countries. Now, what could be opposed to this entrance is, first of all, what is the will of the G7 members? Do they want to expand? Do they want to get to a G7 plus format? Do they want to go to even a G9 format? Because we know that South Korea and Australia are trying to get into the G7 group. That's something that's not been officially discussed by most of the G7 members. They're waiting for an official demand to be able to respond. What could be in opposition for South Korea is on some of the values that is shared by the G7 members. For example, on the freedom of speech, on minority rights. Maybe South Korea might need to adapt. We know that, for example, on minorities' rights, Japan, that's also part of the G7 members, was criticized on this issue in May 2023 when they were holding the summit. So it's really showing that it's really important for the G7 meeting. And also, I know that North Korea Pro made, NK Pro made an article about it, and speaking about the risk on regional ties as well. And how will China react to South Korea getting in a group that China considers being led by the United States? And obviously, how would North Korea react also to this? Would that be considered a provocative act or not? So that could be the opposition. But there is still hope. There are still chances, especially on the diplomatic and general geopolitical sides, because since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the BRICS, so the the group that's where Russia and China are part of, has been getting stronger with more members, and they have been opposed to the G7 group in this war. So maybe G7 members would want to straighten up a little bit and add some members in to be able to kind of balance against the BRIC groups. So that could be a chance for South Korea. And also, in a Yonhap interview last December, the French ambassador said in South Korea that France will be entirely in favor of South Korean efforts to expand the G7 format. But he was mostly speaking about a short-term G7 plus format, not extending for a long time.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, briefly speaking, Jacco, I believe we have time for one question now. South Korea has also been invited to join the NATO summit in Washington this July. What do you believe is the relevance of this continued invitation for South Korea?
Well, let me quickly point out that 3 other Indo-Pacific leaders from Japan, Australia and New Zealand have also been invited, so it's not just South Korea. But it is interesting to see NATO extending its meetings, its invitations to Indo-Pacific leaders. So all 4 countries have now been invited 3 times to these NATO meetings, and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said that it is important to show unity between NATO and its various allies and partners, so meaning these 3 countries, especially in Asia, during Russia's war on Ukraine. So it's about Korea and the other 3 nations working together with NATO on things like cyber and hybrid threats and military technology. So I think you can summarize it as a sign of the increasing tendency of liberal democracies around the world grouping together in opposition to the bloc that's formed by Russia and its allies.
Right, indeed. Hopefully we'll have more to talk about that once it takes place then. All right, Jacco, as always, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Thank you.
And Chloe, thank you very much for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, well, that ends Monday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.